Today, we're looking at Cross Blue. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, there's timestamps down below so that you can skip around to the parts you're most interested in, or if you watch the whole thing, I'd appreciate you. You can follow me on Instagram, and if you're new here and like fountain pen inks as much as I do, I would invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Italics Chaplin's tankards with an oblique italic nib to write for the day and to take my notes for this video. In order to have some standardization in my writing samples, I always use Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer shading throughout, like the B starts lighter and works its way much darker. Cross starts darker, gets lighter, gets darker again. The extra fine is the same tone that we're getting with the stub. The extra fine has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer shading, like look at the word over, how incredibly light it is compared to everything around it. Quick has some nice shading in it. It starts light, gets very dark, gets light, and the K has dark and light in it. 6 seconds to dry. It's not your camera or your screen being weird or the camera being weird. This is just a light blue. The medium is slightly darker than the extra fine or the stub. The medium has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer some shading, like in Quick you see that it's lighter at the top, darker at the bottom. It works its way dark, gets light, gets dark again. So it has a lot of shading, which I should enjoy. 7 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show no color variation. We didn't expect it and we didn't get it. That I accidentally got it a little wet and it sort of disappeared. Tomoe River. No bleeding. Less ghosting than is normal on Tomoe River because this is such a light blue ink. So if you love this ink and you love Tomoe River, you could easily use both sides of the page with this. The 1.1 stub has no feather spread. It does have halo all over it, which is really nice to see here. So it's getting a redeeming factor with the stub. No sheen. It does offer shading, like the blue starts dark, gets light, gets darker again. The extra fine is about the same tones as the stub. The extra fine has no feather spread. It does offer halo in some of its darker areas, like when we see in Dog. The left side of the D doesn't have it, but the right side of the D does have some halo. We'll leave out the D jokes. The starts light, gets very dark, and at the dark, more halo. Over has halo in the entire thing, despite the fact that the word is very light. There's no sheen, there's plenty of shading, 10 seconds to dry. The medium is slightly darker than the extra fine or the stub. The medium has no feather spread, it has halo all over it. Gorgeous haloing, it's like it's been outlined with a nice darker blue. And if all of the writing was that darker blue, it would be awesome. But that haloing makes it easier to read with this being such a pale blue. It has no sheen, it has plenty of shading, and with a lot of the shading comes even more halo. The top of the Q in Quick is much lighter, but it doesn't have the halo. The bottom's much darker, and it does have the halo. 13 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation, although we're getting plenty of color variation. I just think here it was much thicker. It was allowed to level out more, but we do see the halos occur here. Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, no halo, no sheen. It does offer some very nice shading. Again, blue starts dark, works its way lighter, gets darker again at the E. The extra fine is slightly lighter than we get with the stub. The extra fine has no feather spread, halo sheen, but it offers a ton of shading. It really needs that halo to come through to make the letters pop, but it's not there. Look at Quick. It's light on top, darker on the bottom of the Q. It works its way across darker and gets lighter at the top of the K and between the C and the K. So it's very nice there. Fox starts very light and becomes very dark.
very dark for this ink. 8 seconds to dry. The medium is a little bit darker than the extra fine. The medium has no feather, spread, halo sheen. It still offers some of that shading, but the shading, again, it's just the darker areas are still very light. If I look at Fox, it's light at the top, dark on the bottom, gets light again, and darker into the rest of Fox. So it's there, and it's nice. 10 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine, looking far left to far right, shows us color variation, which we got. The scrubby of the medium showed us none, but the writing sample says differently.
I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies.
The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And there's something very interesting here. There's this unknown color line that's there that is definitely a part of this ink, but it almost looks like the tiniest bit of green is in there at that line. Otherwise, all the ink that's moving is just blue. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. Now, the ink doesn't move as far, so it looks a bit darker in place. It looks like it moves away more uniformly, really. But that greenish line is more there, and the blue around it is darker and more there.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it.
Looking at the highlighter, it seems to have worked like an eraser. This ink is disappearing just for having highlighted it. So don't use this in a note-taking situation if you need to go back and highlight. Now, water is completely reactivating and removing it from the page, and in only 30 seconds, not all of the ink is gone, but I believe that given just a little bit longer and a little bit more than 1 drop of water, that's all that's going to be needed to get this out of your pen. You're easily seeing the dots of the Rhodia dot pad. Pen Flush did everything that water did and nothing more, but we shouldn't need that. And the 1/3 bleach solution, even though you're not going to need it, completely obliterated it from the paper.
I test ink viscosity or flow by using a tilt test, and I'll link that somewhere here. And for the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Put the data onto a bell curve or standard deviation for it to be easily understood.
Cross Blue has a viscosity of 2.3, making it normal.
To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average those. Now for the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Cross Blue has an average dry time of 9 seconds, which is very fast. Being that this is a lighter tone of blue, I wanted a nice pink that went with it. I chose Diamine Cerise. The second writing sample is done on black and red, P. Berger, and Levenger paper. In this writing sample, we're looking at black and red notebooks, and they have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does have moments of shading. The L to U in blue is slightly lighter than the E, so there is the ability to get a little bit of shading with a stub nib on this paper. The extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub. The extra fine has no feather spread, halo sheen, and it does offer some shade. When you look at the O and over, it's much lighter than the rest of the word. Jumps starts lighter and gets darker. Quick starts lighter and gets darker. It's just a very light ink. 4 seconds to dry. The medium is darker than the extra fine, about the same tone as the stub. The medium has no feather spread, halo sheen, and it still offers shading. Now, the shading that we're getting here, I just had a brain fart. The shading that we're getting here is more a matter of where the ink seems to look a little bit light, or be a little lighter in the touch, like the top of the Q. I'm not sure if that's a full shading, but on the Y of lazy, where it does get lighter coming down, that's definitely the ink doing that. In jumps, the beginning and the bottom part of the J being a little bit lighter, that is the ink doing that. So you can get some shading. Now the scrubby of the extra fine shows more color variation left to right.
The medium shows some color variation left to right, but we do get those same color variations up in the writing sample. P. Berger paper, it's a French rule student grade paper. It's a very inexpensive paper. For bleeding, it did really nice with the extra fine. It did bleed in spots with the medium, not touching the page underneath, but the medium won't let you use the back of the paper if you wanted to. The 1.1 stub had no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade. The extra fine is a little bit lighter than the stub. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer some shading, sort of like the B in brown is a little lighter than the RO, and the W becomes from darker to lighter. Fox starts light and gets dark. It took only 1 second to dry. The medium is quite a bit darker than the extra fine, and a little bit darker than the medium, or than the stub. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade, 2 seconds to dry. We see the real color variation depending on the nib and the flow. Now the scrubby for both show us no color variation, and we did get some with the extra fine, not so much the medium. I don't think it's a strong point for this ink. Levenger paper. Now we have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shading. The extra fine is slightly lighter than the medium. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and it does offer shading, like the B in brown is lighter than the R, and then it gets lighter into the OW, and the N gets darker again. So the shading back and forth in some of the letters is very nice. Coming back to it's a little too light a blue for me. Jump starts light and gets dark, 5 seconds to dry for the extra fine. Medium is a little bit darker than the extra fine, about the same tone as the stub. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade. Sorry, no shade. Plenty of shading, my bad. Like when you look at dog, it starts light, it's dark at the D to O, but light on the top of the D. The O is nice and dark, the G starts dark and gets light. So it's got nice shading, just not the tone. 6 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us plenty of color variation, looking far left to far right. The medium's not showing as well on camera, but it is there. We did get about that color variation in the writing samples. And that is all that I have for writing samples. So what do I think of Cross Blue? As a color, it's meh. Now, I'm glad I tried it, but I don't have a need for this blue. That tone is absolutely not the blue tone I would prefer. So what pen and nib would give the best writing experience? Well, a wetter pen can make it just a little bit darker, which is part of the problem that I personally have with this ink. Although even darker, it just feels meh to me. If you've made it this far and you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I'm going to remind you to subscribe. Thanks for watching.